Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the January 5th Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. My name is Luke Mortensen, and I'll be filling in for Catherine this month as the staff liaison to the Board of Zoning Appeals. I will work alongside the chair tonight to facilitate the meeting's proceedings. As always, this meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself when not actively speaking. Please keep your video on for the duration of the meeting. If you're participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. As always, there will not be screen sharing as a part of tonight's meeting. All attachments, reference materials, and submissions from the public are included in the agenda packet. The chair will call for in-person and virtual public comment for those who wish to speak. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each commissioner individually to provide their vote. Staff will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. Before I throw it back to the chair, I'll just make a note that between viruses and vacation, we're a little short-staffed this month, and that's why I'm all by myself tonight. So I just ask for a little bit of grace. If it looks like I'm not paying attention, I'm probably doing something with the Zoom. So just know that I am hearing you all and seeing you all while you're chatting with us. So with that, I will toss it back to the chair.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. We will proceed to start the meeting by sending it right back to Luke, who will call the roll to determine whether we have a quorum to proceed.
Board Member Hill.
Here.
Board Member Rankin.
Here.
Board Member Harrod.
Here.
Board Member Shalinsky.
Here.
Board Member Swearingen.
Here.
Board Member Palos.
Here.
And Board Member Matthews.
Here.
We have quorum.
All right. This is Board Member Shalinsky. Thank you, Luke. The next item on our agenda is communications, acknowledging communications to come before the board, disclosure of any ex parte communications or abstentions for specific agenda items, and announcing any agenda items that will be deferred. So first of all, acknowledging communications to come before the board. Is there anything beyond what is in the packet or what we will hear in public hearing?
Luke Mortensen, Planning Development Services. Any communications should be included as a part of tonight's agenda materials.
Very good. Does anyone have any ex parte communications to disclose or intention to abstain from any of the items to be discussed tonight? Okay, there appear to be none. And finally, agenda items to be deferred. It appears that we have one item which was withdrawn by the applicant, so I don't think that's the same as a deferral.
Correct. Public hearing item number 2 had previously been deferred, but it has since been withdrawn by the applicant. That took place last month.
Okay. Very good. Let's proceed then with the public hearing on the one item for public hearing that is before us. It's to consider a request for a variance, B-22 00341. This is a request for a variance from parking standards. The code calls for a minimum number of spaces at 21 spaces. The application is to reduce that requirement to 4 spaces in conjunction with a development of a quality restaurant use at a property located at 900 Pennsylvania Street. This application was submitted by Patrick Watkins on behalf of Severina Del Campo, the property owner of record. I'm going to send this back to Luke to give the staff report and any other descriptions of this matter.
All right, good evening again, board members. Luke Mortensen, planner with Planning Development Services. As Chair Shalinski just noted, public hearing item number 1 is a variance from the off-street parking standards as expressed by Article 9 of the Land Development Code. The specific request is to reduce the required number of off-street parking spaces for a proposed quality restaurant use from 21 spaces to 4 spaces for the property address as 900 Pennsylvania Street. I will now briefly run through the 5 criteria. Criteria 1 focuses on unique conditions based in plating or zoning. This variance originates from the applicant's desire to establish a quality restaurant use within the existing building addressed as 900 Pennsylvania Street, as well as a proposed building addition. Staff does not believe that the subject property has unique conditions based on its plating or zoning. The subject property is a platted original town site lot with an area of approximately 5,850 square feet. Original town site lots are located throughout Old West Lawrence, East Lawrence, Pinckney, and the Oriad neighborhoods. An analysis of the subject property's zoning history is located within the staff report. However, I'll note that it has maintained an industrial or manufacturing-based zoning district since the adoption of zoning in the city in 1927. While the subject property is directly adjacent to residential land uses and zoning districts, it has electively maintained its non-residential zoning status throughout a series of East Lawrence down zonings. Last month, the City Commission approved a rezoning of the subject property from the IG, that's our General Industrial District, to the IL, that's our Limited Industrial District. The rezoning was requested by the applicant in order to establish this proposed quality restaurant use, which is not permitted in the previously zoned IG, the General Industrial District. I'll refer mostly to the staff report for the analysis of the subject property's previous non-conforming status. However, in 2020, this board upheld the planning director's determination that the previous bar lounge use was abandoned and the property's non-conforming status forfeited. To conclude this section, the subject property has a traditionally shaped original town site lot that does not exhibit unique characteristics. Additionally, the subject property has electively maintained its industrial zoning district over time, including a recent applicant-driven rezoning to the limited industrial district. Finally, the board's determination in 2020 that this property no longer maintains legal nonconforming status. Criteria 2 focuses on adverse effects upon the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. In staff's opinion, the requested variance would not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. Reducing the number of required off-street spaces would not restrict the existing adjacent detached dwelling and light equipment repair uses from maintaining their code compliant status. Criteria number 3 focuses on unnecessary hardship upon the applicant. Staff does not believe that requiring the applicant to provide the required number of off-street parking spaces rises to the level of unnecessary hardship as defined by Article 17 of the Land Development Code which is also included in the staff report for your reference. The applicant could establish the proposed quality restaurant use within a building area or at a level of staffing that could be supported by its own off-street parking area. This proposed variance is an accommodation to a specific development that would allow an applicant to develop a property to a higher level of intensity than intended by the Land Development Code and does not constitute an unnecessary hardship. Criteria number 4 focuses on adverse effects on the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, prosperity, and general welfare. In staff's opinion, granting this variance request may adversely affect the above listed items. Street parking where permitted within the East 9th and Pennsylvania Street rights-of-way is not allocated to specific properties or land uses and already provides additional overflow parking for existing residential and non-residential uses within the neighborhood and the 8th and Penn District. Still, it is reasonable to expect that this proposed quality restaurant use could generate increased parking within the public right-of-way, which could be considered an inconvenience to adjacent residential land uses and users. Finally, criteria number 5 focuses on the general spirit and intent of the code. Staff does not believe the proposed variance aligns with the spirit and intent of Article 9 and the Land Development Code. The variance process is intended to equalize the development process for properties that are overburdened by unique characteristics and or where compliance with the Land Development Code would constitute an unnecessary hardship. The variance as proposed would accommodate a proposed building addition and would alter the bundle of development rights awarded to this specific property. The Land Development Code anticipates it may be difficult for some properties to provide fully compliant off-street parking areas. Therefore, there are multiple relief mechanisms within Article 9 and Article 13 of the Land Development Code. These include off-site and shared parking agreements, the provision of a range of parking above or below the required minimum amount, or an off-street parking waiver granted by the planning director. This variance, as proposed, does not align with the stated purpose or the general spirit and intent of Article 9 and the Land Development Code. To conclude, staff recommends denial of this variance request to reduce the required number of off-street parking spaces from 21 spaces to 4 spaces for a proposed quality restaurant use located at 900 Pennsylvania Street. As always, staff is available for questions, and the applicant is with us on Zoom tonight as well.
All right, thank you. I now turn it over to the board and invite any of you who have questions for the staff to ask them at this time. Anybody have questions?
I have a couple questions. This is Tressa. I was looking at the zoning map and wanted to confirm in East Lawrence, I thought I only saw one other light industrial zone, the Decade Cafe. Is that true?
I can pull up our interactive map and take a look, but I do see a little bit of IL, the light industrial, to the east of, to the northeast of the subject property, kind of in the upper right-hand corner of Figure 1. It's IL-UC, so that's the limited industrial district with an overlay on top. So there is other IL in the neighborhood.
Right. And that has UC with it, right? Urban
conservation. Yeah.
Got it. Well, that was one thing I wanted to ask. And the other thing, when I was thinking of the neighborhood, East Lawrence neighborhood, are there, and I was driving the streets, are there many unused or abandoned buildings?
I don't know if I don't know if I can answer that question. But do you have a specific area in mind, and I can do a little bit of research?
Well, the East Lawrence itself, was something I was thinking of, and I didn't see any. It doesn't mean that there aren't any there.
Yep, I just don't think I'm prepared to answer that question at this moment. If you are thinking in terms of if there are other buildings where maybe they could park or do some sort of parking agreement, that may be a better question for Mr. Watkins when he speaks. I believe he's done some research on that for this property, and so he can add to that.
Got it. I'll do that. Okay, you answered that one question. And a general question, if you could help us understand where you see the warehouse district itself expanding in the future. Do you see that, or are those boundaries for the next whatever set?
So the 8th and Penn, kind of that pinpointed area, is pretty identified. It has a kind of a special overlay on top of it that is shown with those lines, those hatches. So that's a special zoning component that goes above and beyond the base zoning district. I don't myself envision that changing, but we have talked about at the last couple of meetings, the East Lawrence neighborhood plan is underway at this time, and so that will not change zoning itself, but it could provide recommendations or plans for land use decisions and zoning decisions in the future. And that would be for the broader East Lawrence neighborhood, which would include the subject property.
Okay. That's what I have right now.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Tressa. Does anyone else have any questions for the staff?
Yes, I do. This is Dean. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Luke, this is for you. You mentioned that there were options on parking, and could you go back over that? Just kind of elaborate. And related to that is, did the applicant ask for any of these options?
Yes. So the first option I mentioned was shared or offsite parking agreements. Our code in Article 9 has a specific section dedicated to offsite parking lots or shared parking with other land uses. There are a number of criteria related to time of users and their peak parking habits, distance to the subject property, elements like that would have to be reviewed and approved as part of a site plan. But there are options for parking, for providing your required parking at a different location. So that was that first option. The second option I noted was for most non-residential uses, our Article 9 was fairly recently amended so that they can now provide a range from below the minimum or above the minimum. And that range differs based on the size of the parking lot. But they could provide a certain percentage below what's required or a certain percentage above what's required. And I know Catherine mostly worked with Patrick on this application, and I do believe at the very beginning they discussed the range option, and I'm not sure it totally helped them out in this instance. And then the final option was a waiver from the planning director, and the planning director has some flexibility for granting waivers from site planning and land development code standards, not everything. And he will often review waiver requests for parking. Typically, it's for much smaller amounts, maybe 1 to 3 parking spaces. If you're very close, he will generally consider those. Anything above that, 1 to 3 number, he'll typically defer to the Board of Zoning Appeals and is more comfortable with you guys making that decision.
Okay. So is it my understanding that that issue is more of a site plan procedure than it is at this time, or it's not part of this?
Yeah, most of all those options that we just listed would kind of be ironed out during the site planning process, and then would be noted and formalized on that ultimately approved site plan.
Would that provide the another avenue for the applicant then?
That might be a better a question for Pat. I'm not sure any of those ultimately worked out for this lot.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Do any other board members have additional questions for the staff? Okay, hearing none, I will now invite the applicant to make a statement and then answer questions.
Thank you, Chairman Shelinski. This is Patrick Watkins. I am an attorney here in town. I'm here on behalf of Brad Ziegler. He is the owner of record. He wasn't able to join us tonight. This hearing got rescheduled a couple of times, but I do see that Mike Myers is on the call too. He's part of our team. He is an architect. He works at Hernley and Associates. He lives in East Lawrence like I do, and he's the designer on this project. I saw you all a couple of months ago. We talked about the Turnholla project at 900 Rhode Island. It was a massive variance request, and you all granted it at that time. We're moving east down 9th Street, a few blocks to 900 Pennsylvania. It's a different property, but sort of strikingly, these two requests have a number of resounding similarities. Like Turnholla, this is a very old stone building that ought to be saved. It's in the heart of East Lawrence, and it's suffered from longstanding vacancy. It suffered from neglect, and it has found a new steward that is ready to breathe new life into an old building. If everything works out, this is a remarkable preservation achievement, saving a building that's otherwise exposed from historic protections. It's on a corner parcel, just like the Turnholla. It's not particularly large lot. This parcel has been used commercially as a restaurant and a bar over the past several decades. It doesn't appear to have had anything other than commercial uses of some sort. The parking dynamic is not dramatically different from Turnholla either. The parcel obviously is not capable of providing parking needed for commercial uses. It cannot carry that burden. It has a big enough building, although it's not like Turnholla in the sense that the building takes up the whole lot. It's just not able to provide it. We can go through some of that analysis, and I'm sure Mike can discuss that. But in other similarities to Turnholla, it is adjacent to a district that has shared parking requirements. The 8th and Penn district has a shared parking dynamic. It has angled parking on both sides of Pennsylvania, a number of public stalls, even an off-street lot that's public, that's designed to carry shared parking burden. Turnholla, similarly, in comparison, is next to the downtown commercial district. I know that was a point of some significance in that discussion. You might also recall that in the Turnholla discussion, there was a parking lot across the street that was reserved for use of the Turnholla. In this case, again, sort of strikingly, we have a parking lot across the street, and it's across the alley as well. It's catty corner from this Charlie's spot, but it's a surface parking lot. It's owned by Tony Kresnick. It's privately owned. The developer, my client, Brad Ziegler, went out of his way to secure a lease agreement to use that parking lot, all contingent upon getting these necessary approvals for use, which we recently received. But that similarity is sort of striking. We have a 37, I believe, space parking lot across the street that's reserved for the use by Charlie's. Now, that parking lot is used primarily by office users in the Poultry Building, which is at 832 Pennsylvania, daytime parkers primarily. Some people that end up going to beer company may use it. That's technically unauthorized use because it's a private lot, but I don't think there's any enforcement taking place at this time. Unfortunately, because that lot is designated in the 8th and Pennsylvania design guidelines for future development, it does not meet all the requirements for off-street parking agreements noted in the code. So it does not eliminate our parking requirement for this commercial use on a quality restaurant. But it is a significant factor in this application. We feel like we have all of the parking necessary for the feasibility of this project right now, all of the off-street parking. There's some differences from the Turnholla project. This request tonight is for a reduction from 21 spaces down to 4. It's much smaller request than what we were talking about with Turnholla. And as Luke noted, these parking requirements are set by code. It's based upon 1 space for every 100 square feet of service area, plus 1 space for every employee on the largest shift. We estimated 1,620 square feet of service area. This is not a dramatically large space. 1,620 feet is very similar, if not smaller than Culinaria. It's probably about the same size as Bon Bon. And I think Mike Myers can attest to some of these things if you have questions about them. Ultimately, this is all in an effort to get smaller neighborhood commercial uses like what this property used to be when Charlie's operated here. It's exactly the type of project that the city is striving for. Friendly neighborhood commercial activity, a place for neighborhood residents to walk, enjoy a brunch on Sunday or an evening meal. This is a goal of our strategic planning documents. It's noted as one of the dynamic attributes of the East Lawrence strategic or neighborhood plan. It's a goal of our long-term planning documents. And so our application is based upon a lot of the feedback that we've received over the last several months of going through a rezoning of this property, rezoning it from general industrial down to light industrial to allow quality restaurant to operate at this location. Staff noted that this property may have been used commercially as long as anyone can remember. In 2020, as staff noted, there was a non-conforming use determination that the existing Charlie's did not operate consecutively for 12 months, and that non-conforming use was extinguished. And so again, we had to go through this rezoning to get quality restaurant allowed at this site. It started with meetings with city staff and the planning staff. It included visits with the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association. It included engaging with neighbors, discussing how this property is going to transition from the commercial uses on the north to the residential uses on the south. It included a number of design changes and refinements, a very large reduction in the size of the proposed addition, a number of protection to residential neighbors. And frankly, I'm really pleased to report and to be a part of this project because these efforts from the developer, from Mike Myers, were met with support at every level. The planning staff supported our rezoning application. The planning commission recommended approval. The city commission unanimously approved quality restaurant use here by light industrial zoning designation. This is all noteworthy because I think there's a suggestion in the staff report that these uses are not appropriate, and that's how they reach their findings. But this process that we've been through over the last 6 months to rezone this property is really a remarkable one in that everyone we ended up talking to, because we did this process in the ways that transitioned into the neighborhood, that respected the residential character of the neighborhood, they all supported quality restaurant. Again, the city commission unanimously supported a rezoning into IL based upon our proposed use of quality restaurants. You all have heard staff's perspective on our application, and at some level, I understand that Luke and Catherine have a job to do. They cannot support every parking variance that comes up, and it really brings me no pleasure to disagree with them. But there are some statements in that staff report that I think I'm compelled to address with you all. So I'll just mention a few of those, but we did submit a thorough and comprehensive application. A lot of these statements are included in our application. The staff reports that the parking shortage for this parcel has been induced by the applicant, by the applicant's proposal for a quality restaurant. And I just have to strongly disagree. This property has been a restaurant for over 4 decades. It has had a lapse and it's been vacant for some time, but it is the city that has subjected this property to new zoning designations on 2 different occasions. It was not the Del Campos. It was not the Mr. Ziegler, who are creating new requirements for this parcel. It is the city's zoning code, which places these burdens upon the property. But even if we were to assume that the property owner should keep up with the city's changing zoning codes, we've played by the rules and we sought rezoning, like I mentioned, and the city leadership has resoundingly supported it. To suggest that this use is inappropriate is a striking contradiction to the feedback that we've received up to this point from city leadership. Staff report indicates that the addition that's being proposed here is unnecessarily large. Again, I strongly disagree. The rezoning process reduced the size of this building dramatically. The resulting design is the smallest possible addition that could be created, maintaining a shred of feasibility for the project. Much of the feedback that we received during this rezoning was whether or not this addition was adequate size to make a feasible restaurant out of this building. The addition is going to be a requirement under every possible rehabilitation scenario for this property. ADA requirements, bathroom requirements, fire code requirements, building code requirements. All of these things will trim this square footage down. All of these things must be met when this property gets rehabilitated. The staff has suggested that the applicant could rehab the building without an addition and fit all of the necessary parking on site. Again, we disagree with this. This is probably not even realistic to think about this, but to begin with, operating a 600 square foot restaurant at this site is just not realistic. We also know that the city won't allow the existing building to operate without a range of improvements. The same improvements that I've mentioned, building code review, ADA improvements, fire code, all of which likely will require some massive configurations. It's also factually inaccurate to say that the existing building could fit a rehab of the existing building with parking accommodation on the site could happen. The staff's analysis suggests that there's 600 square feet of service area. There's actually 1,000 square feet on the existing building. The front porch is over 400 square feet. And that's not included in the staff's analysis. The staff suggests that we could get by with 6 parking spaces and fit them all in the back of the lot. It's not possible. There's 1,000 square feet of service area, and there'd be at least 4 service employees on the largest shift. That's 13 to 14 parking spaces under every scenario. If this existing building were to be rehabilitated, it would require a parking variance of some sort. I think the staff has a number of statements that I could object to. I think they try to make the statement that this property is not unique. And I really have a hard time hearing that. It's unlike any building on its block. It's notably abandoned and vacant, which there aren't many of. It's zoned IL on a block that has only a residential otherwise. It's been used commercially as long as anyone can remember. And it's absolutely incapable of carrying its own parking for commercial uses. This is a unique property without a doubt. Again, I don't want to engage in too much detailed review of the staff report when there's so many positive things about this project. It'll add another neighborhood restaurant, similar in nature to Culinaria, to Bon Bon, to Lawrence Beer Company, which I think the community has resoundingly supported. It fits in line with all of our planning documents. It will save a landmark stone building that's otherwise unprotected. It builds upon the success of the neighborhood district, which is perhaps one of the most exciting warehouse districts in the state. And it provides all the parking that it could provide in this case, 4 spots on site, and is secured a parking lease with a neighboring property. The remaining parking that could result from the street parking will be minimal in nature and just won't impact the ability for residences to access their property, all of which have alley access to garages on the backside of the property. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all may have. I know this is a bit technical of a review, but I'm really proud to be a part of this project and provide any information that you all can need for your determinations.
All right. Thank you. Do any members of the board have any questions for Mr. Watkins?
I have a couple questions, Mr. Chair, if you'll allow it.
Please.
Patrick, both you and Luke reminded us that this property came through back in 2020 when it lost the non-conforming status. But that wasn't your project, and you didn't represent the Del Campos, did you?
I did not. You're correct.
Right. So you might not really have any memory of that particular conversation. I remember a couple things that I want to ask you about. Is one, I remember that one of the things we talked about, the property was going to need a substantial amount of work inside to make it conforming to really do just about anything in it. It was just really far gone, is what I remember. And that had been a barrier to the former owners being able really to, keep it open. They'd essentially been shut down by the health department. And then the second thing I remember is there was a lot, at least as I remember, there was a lot of input from the surrounding neighbors. Well, this time I see we have a letter from the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association and another letter from an LLC that's doing something on Pennsylvania Street, I guess. So, one, can you confirm that, am I right as far as there need to be a substantial amount of remediation done inside this property to really do anything useful with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the case. I walked through it the other day. It's not in a position to be a commercial use without substantial investment. It's the sort of investment that the current owner is not in a position to put forth. You might remember from that hearing, I mean, Charlie has had some health issues. He wasn't able to dedicate himself fully to the property, and he sought investment and he sought a new owner.
And then, so you said that you engaged with both. You said you engaged with some folks regarding this project and got a lot of positive feedback. But I really am sitting here. It's really interesting to me that I don't see don't think I see anybody on this Zoom call from the neighborhood, and I don't see any letters in our packet from the neighbors. I'm not missing anything, am I, Patrick or Luke?
We do have one member of the public.
Okay, so we got one person. Okay, I'll be interested to hear what they have to say. But Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to mislead anybody. There were objections to the rezoning. We focus most of our attention on Bruce and Jackie. Bruce Eggers and Jackie Counts live right next door. I met with them personally probably half a dozen times. We created a range of protections for their property, and we unilaterally did that and just offered it to them. One of which was to offer to buy them storm windows. They had concerns about sound. We don't have the same concerns because we've designed the building and plan to design the building in a way that really buffers the residential neighborhood. But we offered to put up to $5,000 worth of storm windows on their house, which they don't currently have. Some of their windows don't support it, but we committed to facing everything to the north. We committed to co-authoring the landscape and buffer yards with Bruce and Jackie. We committed to working out the lighting and sound systems to make sure it doesn't create any sort of contradicting uses and expectations for the neighborhood. It was a pretty thorough discussion. I mean, Bruce and Jackie never found themselves in a position to support the project, and a number of neighbors came out and opposed the project. It's a testament to the planning process in some respects, in my opinion, that we had a thorough discussion. Some of these decisions aren't easy, but we did get in what I would characterize as resounding support from the decision makers. A number of people I know were meeting independently on that 900 block of Pennsylvania, and I think they sort of organized support is what I would characterize it as. And obviously, we met with the neighborhood association. I've been in touch with their leadership and been available to them if they had any questions or comments, but we presented at one of their meetings and sought feedback. We had a planning commission meeting, we had a city commission meeting, so there's been some thorough dialogue. We probably had a dozen neighbors out. I don't want to discount the positive support. It's not easy to get people to come out of their and find their way to support a project like this. The planning commission probably had 4 letters of support, not all resident neighbors, but we know that we have support in that commercial district to the north in the warehouse district. We know that there are people on Pennsylvania that support this project. Certainly, the planning commission, the city commission was mostly about objections and making sure that concerned neighbors were being heard and that steps were being taken to make sure that this wouldn't impose upon the residential nature of that block.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question, and that is with regard to the ownership of the property. Has Mr. Ziegler acquired actual title, or is this still sort of a conditional or provisional thing that has not been completed yet?
It's my understanding he closed right before the end of the year. So he is the owner of the property.
Okay, thank you.
And Barry, I'll just note that sometimes those ownership changes do take a week or two to show up from the county's parcel data.
Okay, I mean, I'm going to take Mr. Watkins at his word on that. But, clearly, like, the application was under the name of the previous owner, and I just wanted to clarify the status of things. Do any other board members have any questions for the applicant?
I do.
have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious. You've indicated that there is a lease with a neighboring business owner for parking. Do we have any information regarding the length of that lease? I think you're muted.
Patrick, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. It's got to happen at least once a meeting. There is a lease agreement, and it is perpetual, but both parties have the right to terminate. Both parties needed that. There's a timeline for termination that gives Brad essentially the opportunity to go find replacement parking. But it is a sizable surface lot. It's right across 9th Street. It's catty corner from this spot. The reason it doesn't comply with the off-street parking agreements that the code calls for is because this property could develop at some point in time. And there may be some ways to shoehorn that in to a site plan, but we didn't think it was appropriate. In this case, we know of no plans to develop that site. We think that the parking will be there for as long as is needed. And to the extent it goes away, Brad's concept will simply require that he go seek and find some additional offsite parking. Some patrons won't require parking because they'll be walking to this place. And hopefully that's what we're all striving for, is reduced parking anyway with neighborhood commercial restaurants. But Brad desires to provide off-street parking for most of his patrons, or at least the option. So notwithstanding any code requirement, we always think it's going to be part of our feasibility on this project to supply off-street parking in whatever form it comes. This happens to be the closest, most reasonable and appropriate parking that can be found, and it's been secured.
Thank you.
I have a question. Patrick, who's making the decision that you can't do this. You can't use that because of the anticipated reuse of the property. And it just seems like that's kind of speculative on everybody's part. And I'm unfamiliar with that as a cause for if someone can meet a requirement and there's some prospect that in the near future, in the long distance future, that that parking will go away. I'm not sure. I don't know quite how to assess that. I think the point is that if you can provide the parking right now with that lease agreement, and Luke, I guess this is for you too. I don't understand why that doesn't satisfy the terms here. At least, in other words, if the lot is sold, my assumption is that the owner of the Charlie's is going to have to find some other alternative, but that comes up at that point. That would be a violation of the city's code, that he wouldn't, and there'd be a different avenue, I suppose, to address that. But yeah, this is
it's a great question. It's a great question, and I'll give you two answers. One is from a procedural perspective. We secured the lease with Tony Kresnick, and it wasn't hard. He's looking for users of that parking lot, and this is a very appropriate user. It matches well with the timing of his other users. They signed it, and they agreed to a couple of things in that agreement. And so we submitted it to the city. The city, I think, reviewed it, indicated that there's two reasons why it does not comply with their criteria for off-street parking agreements. One is that it's indefinite in nature, and if it were to terminate, then your parking requirement is put back into place. I think that would be acceptable on its own. But the second reason is that the parking lot across the street, for reasons probably totally unrelated, has not been site planned. And you have to site plan a parking lot before they will count it for your credit. Site planning process is a little bit burdensome in this case. The site plans for parking lots in this district, one, have to have parking islands with landscaping. They have to meet surface requirements. They probably have to have curbs, gutters, lighting. We're talking about probably many thousands of dollars worth of just engineering, but also improvements. And then there's, sorry to burden this, but there was a third reason. There is a shared parking dynamic in that district. And I don't think the technical review has occurred, but for every parking space that is taken up by another use, it counts towards the overall use of those parking spaces within that district. As long as the district maintains a surplus of parking, people can continue to develop. If they need to, for instance, the Quonset hut, which is at 8th Street, will develop at some point. It will have to carry its own parking burden, but it could use some open public parking spaces on another lot. So in this case, the analysis hasn't been made about whether or not we're going to infringe upon other people's park uses on this particular lot. So there's sort of a three-part test, and we failed all three of them. So we just said, we'll try and get the variance.
Thank you.
I should say, Luke, if you hear anything that sounds inaccurate there, I'd ask that you correct it.
No, I think you covered it. I was going to tack on to the end for Board Member Hill. The 8th and Penn design guidelines are a design guidelines overlay similar to Oriat and downtown guidelines, and I'll be happy to email them to you after. They're quite long and they're not located in the code. But to Patrick's point, these design guidelines have specific parking area standards in addition to the land development code's standard regular parking standards. And he touched on some of those: landscaping, lighting, surfacing, curb gutter, those types of things. So yeah, Patrick covered it.
I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
Did I understand correctly, Patrick, that you think that currently that there can only be 4 cars parked on this lot, or can it be 6 or 8 if there were no additions added to the back?
I think you could fit more if there was not an addition on the back. You could probably do 4 on each side of that entrance. We had a design that pulled parking in off the alley, and we could fit 5 spaces. There was objection to that from some neighbors, and so we made an adjustment and we didn't pull parking in off the alley. It's coming off of 9th Street. So theoretically, if that parking was shifted, there's a schematic late in the application packet, or the packet that you all can see with some of our design renderings. We show 4. If that was pushed to the east, sure, you might be able to put 4 along the alley without changing access from 9th Street.
And if you did not have an addition and you focused on the 600 square feet for both the basement and the first floor, plus the 400, I was wondering about the deck, so thanks for bringing that up. If you were to put a deck in up front, how much space would you have then for customers in total? After, this is slightly an architectural question, but once you have your handicapped entrance, an elevator for the handicap, the stairs, the kitchen, storage, code storage, mechanical closet, how much space are you left with then without an addition?
You know, Mike is on the call and I'll let him follow up with my answer, but I think your basement's going to be accessibility, cold storage, bathrooms. Your main floor, you still have a bar there. But I think you're looking in the 600 square foot range. And I'm not sure if you all could, I wish you all could walk into this building, because the outline on these designs doesn't do it justice. Those walls are 2 feet thick with stone. So you lose 2 feet on every edge. We're talking about, this is like a closet in a sense. We're talking about the inside of Bon Bon, if you've ever been there. You can't hold that many people. I'd say it's 600 square feet. You have the front parking, or the front porch, theoretically, which is 400 square feet or so, the existing one at least. We are still committed to taking that off. It's not something that the neighbors seem to like, and we think it ought to go away just because it has sort of a front-facing, residential side to it. But if you added those two together, right? I think you're going to this place, you get 1,000 square feet, that's 10 parking spaces that you'd have to have. That's without considering the employee parking burden that you're also supposed to carry. Does that answer the question, Tresson?
Yeah, yes. And I guess for Luke, when you have a building this size, and recognizing the neighbors' requirements not to come in off the alley, for example, if you're not adding on, can you identify multiple potential uses in limited industrial for this building? I'm trying to figure out what the feasibility of the building is for other uses.
Yes. So a couple things. I'll just note that parking could be taken off the alley. That's not a code restriction. It sounds like it's more of a neighbor request or preference. So parking could come off the alley. As far as allowed uses in the IL district, there's quite a few. Those are all located in Article 4. A lot of the uses that are allowed in the IL district by their very nature have use restrictions, and those could be additional standards above and beyond the regular standards. And some of those use restrictions paired with such a small lot, that original town site lot, that does limit what you can do on the property. But if it's in Article 4, the use table, and it's a permitted use, technically the code would permit a number of uses on that site, quality restaurant being one of them. And I will also just note, because we talked about it, customer service area does count towards off-street parking requirements, both interior and exterior. So that is why we're talking about decks so much. That would also apply to a patio at Starbucks, or, you know, exterior is seen the same as interior.
Is Barry frozen?
He might be. Let's check.
I think that's a moment in time frozen there.
He just dropped out, so let's give him a minute to come back in. So in the instance that he doesn't come back, or if you would like to continue discussion, the vice chair could continue that.
Remind us, who is the vice chair?
Can I ask the same question?
I believe that's me. I figured we'd give him a minute or two and then move on.
Okay. You know, am I close, Luke? I actually counted how many parking spaces might be available in that general area. You mean, you know, the city lot, the angled parking along Delaware and Pennsylvania, plus the leased lot. Am I in the ballpark with over 180 spaces?
So we did not do a parking analysis for the 8th and Penn district as part of this BZA request, just because we haven't seen any any studies submitted as part of that site plan that Pat was talking about. So at this point, I can't confirm that number for you. Based on our past history and observation, I think you're in the ballpark, though.
I also noticed that you had there are both housing and businesses that have their own parking.
That's correct. I will stay as high level as I can because I was not directly involved, but recently there's was a planning director determination that parking serving off-street parking serving specific uses in the 8th and Penn district is not required to share that. The on-street parking and then, you know, the public off-street parking is shared, and that's what Pat was talking about.
Right. But that parking for both business that's designated specifically for businesses and housing, that does reduce the need for parking in the district, the overall need.
It could, if it's going towards their own requirements, yes.
Got it. Thanks.
This is Barry Shalinsky. First of all, I apologize that I seem to keep getting disconnected. For staff and Mr. Watkins, just to clarify, this property is not within the district, it's adjacent to it. Is that correct?
That's correct. And to Board Member Hill's earlier question, expanding the district would require commission approval from the Planning Commission, the City Commission. It would be a multi-step, multi-approval process.
Are there other board members who have questions for the applicant?
Yes, this is Dean again. Just question. East Lawrence, I didn't see the letter from them. I guess I just overlooked it, but can somebody tell me what their response was to this request? Or did they have a specific response? Anybody?
East
They were on
Lawrence
page
neighborhood.
38. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good.
Oh, they were just on page 38. And they, the East Lawrence Association said they would deny the request to reduce parking requirements from 21 to 4, would be inclined to support the variance had they chosen a more neighborhood-friendly zoning designation such as CN1. So to accommodate pedestrian-oriented small-scale retail. So, and then we had a letter from pages 38 and 39. Another one's from the Penn Street Line LLC.
Okay. Were they in support of it? No? Okay, I'm sorry. I missed those two last pages, I guess. Thank you.
Did we have someone there to talk to, you said, Luke? A member of the public?
Yes, and if the chair is ready to move to public comment, we can do that.
Well, I am ready, but I don't know whether the board is ready, because procedurally what we do is we ask questions of the applicant before we open the public hearing. So once the board members are done with questions, we can proceed with the next step. Okay, any more questions for the applicant? Okay, let's proceed with the public hearing then.
I'm not seeing any Zoom commenters, so if you're ready for in-person public comment, we can begin with that.
Very good.
Good evening. I'm Marcy Francisco. I live at 1101 Ohio, but I am a member of Penn Street Line LLC, and that LLC is the owners of the property at 901 Pennsylvania across the street and the neighboring community garden. Phil Collison, our registered agent, submitted a letter objecting to the approval of this request. As a business, we're pleased to be able to provide affordable housing and the land for the garden. Our current tenants do rely on street parking for their visitors. This shared parking would create some burden for them. I noted that a comment was made that no one was around who remembered this before it was commercial, except I was here. And in fact, I was serving on the city commission in 1979 to 83. Just before my term, the owner had applied to make this property renovated as a residential property, and the city denied that request because the land was zoned manufacturing. And so that's really an awkward situation because the building itself had never been commercial before that. My concerns are that This parking is dependent on a lease. I think the project applicants have very good intentions, but in fact, if this zoning variance is granted, there would be no requirement to provide parking above those 4 spaces. So if something happened to the lease across the street, not a problem. And I'm hoping staff can confirm that that would be the case. This has been an awkward issue of zoning. I did attend the Planning Commission and I watched the City Commission. In both cases, they referenced that the application was essentially for a down zoning. It was to take general industrial to this light industrial. And so I think that's some of the support for that change in zoning. But in fact, the planning staff did not recommend commercial for this property because it would not fit with the commercial guidelines that we have and the requirement that the commercial nodes be a certain amount of distance apart. So I think this is significantly different from the application for the turn hauling. That was not built as a residence. This particular property was. So I do appreciate the comments made in the staff report. I think the job of the Board of Zoning Appeals is to find that it meet the criteria. And I think there were very valid arguments made by the staff that this application does not meet those criteria. And I would ask that you deny it. I think, as we've heard, there are other avenues that the applicant has, including purchasing land for parking that would allow them to make this use. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Do any board members have any questions for Marcy Francisco?
Yeah, I have one question. I thought I read that this building, when it was built, at the time of construction, the subject property was zoned light industrial. Was housing allowed in light industrial at the time? Was this building a house at that time or going to be a house?
I can reference our 2020 staff report, which did a much deeper zoning history on that. And so if you give me a few minutes, I can pull that up.
Sounds good.
I believe
while
this
Luke is working on that. It's my belief that it was probably built prior to there being any zoning. It's a pretty old building, but we'll see what he says.
Well, the staff report says it was built in 1940, would have fallen under the 1935 zoning guides, whatever that would have limited it to.
Right.
If you'll excuse me, it takes me a while to log into the network, but I'm getting there.
So while Luke is looking, I looked up the non-residential district use table district, and there's some interesting things you can do by right. You can have mobile homes.
Right.
You can have a college or university.
Right.
Special permit, you could have a detention facility. Let's see. Boat or RV rental, boat or RV storage, heavy equipment rental, heavy equipment repair, kennel, livestock sale, They have a fast food drive-through.
Board Member Harrod, I do have a comment on that. If you guys would allow me just to speak just for a second, I might save you some time. Is that all right? Board Member Shelinski?
It's fine with me
Sure.
if Travis is finished.
Yeah, just to save some time, this was a conditional zoning. We eliminated most of the high intensity industrial uses off of the use list for light industrial. So we have downzoned into light industrial, but we have removed like 14 uses. Some of the ones you're mentioning, the heinous ones, we're not allowed to do because it's a conditional zoning.
Well, I think that actually kind of gets to my concern, which is, what are we supposed to do with this lot?
Yeah.
So, excuse me. I pulled up our staff report from the 2020 admin determination case. We referenced a Sanborn map from 1905, which had this as a dwelling, a stone dwelling unit. Now, the fact that the county says 1940 is not totally crazy. Oftentimes, when you get to go that far back, they will begin referencing a major project or something like that. So it's possible that an addition was in 1940 or a major upgrade was in 1940. But our 2020 research shows that at least in 1905, it was a stone dwelling.
Okay, and was there an answer to your question, Travis? I mean, and especially, what can you do with the lot?
Can I comment on that? Just as this applicant made a request for rezoning, it's possible to make an additional request for rezoning. So it would be possible to ask for this property to be zoned residential and use the building for the reason that it was first constructed. So I don't know that the city commission or the planning commission would want to initiate that. It might be considered a taking, but it's certainly a possibility for the applicant. I don't think just because we, at one point when the zoning was adopted, said this is we expect this to be a manufacturing area. And at that time, I think they were trying to get away from mixed use. We've had this same problem in North Lawrence, where there was a lot of property zoned industrial that had single family houses on it. So the owner who wanted to renovate it as a residence was denied. They were told one use could be a bar. The East Lawrence neighborhood objected to it becoming a bar, but it certainly wasn't operated in a way that was detrimental to the neighborhood. But again, the Board of Zoning Appeals is supposed to look at the conditions of the property and whether it meets the requirements for a variance. This property is not unique. This doesn't create an unnecessary hardship. This would allow a higher use of intensity. The street parking that would be used if it's closer than the parking across the street could be considered an inconvenience. I hope that you, as members of the Board of Zoning Appeals, pay attention to the requirements and the conditions that have to be met, especially when there have been objections to this use. I do know that many of the neighbors believe that it would be possible to have a small restaurant here or another use, but they have been told that it would be impossible to make it that use conditional for time. They were worried about it being open until midnight or 2 a.m. There's no way to have conditions about noise. So there are concerns from the neighbors. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. Patrick, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I mean, if there's going to be continued suggestions about residential use, I just feel the need to remark on that. And I know Marcy's spoken earlier about this, but I don't think we have a great indication that it's ever been used residentially. Sanborn maps suggest that it was a dwelling, but this was one of the most heavily industrial used areas in the city. We've done a lot of research working for other members and other owners in the Warehouse Arts District. There was a fur trader on 9th and Delaware until like the 1960s. There was salvage yards. We have pictures of this property with stonemasons right behind it. The fact that there's a dwelling indicated in 1905, I think, is an indication of construction. But the fact that they tried to rezone it to residential in the 1950s, I think, is an indication that it's been used commercially or industrially for periods before that time. All of 9th Street has, save a couple of residents along 9th Street. It is a commercial thoroughfare or corridor, I should say. So I just wanted to point that out. I mean, I've grown familiar with this district. I've grown familiar with the history of it. To suggest that this is exclusively a residence, I think or designed to be a residence, I think is not supported by what I've seen in this district or what I see along 9th Street. So I wanted to point that out. Secondarily, I think there's been some discussion about parking, and the stakeholders in the Warehouse Arts District do have a plan for parking. It is informal still at this point, but there is not a parking problem over there. And I think all of the users within that area would have an agreement about off-street parking to the extent that a parking issue had already been created. There are off-street lots. There is a proposal to allow full public use of off-street lots, but I don't think there is the interest in memorializing that proposal until enough users are in this area to soak up the existing public parking. So I did want to deposit that potential, that specific issue. The users in this district, the owners in this district are well aware that their concepts, their feasibility is dependent upon supplying parking. It's also dependent upon maintaining good relations with the neighborhood and not allowing parking to bleed into the neighborhood. These are issues capable of being solved by the property owners within the Warehouse Arts District. Thanks.
May I comment as well?
Briefly, yes.
My husband and I owned the property at 738 Rhode Island.
Who's testifying right now?
This is Marcy Francisco.
Chairperson Schlitzky, I object to this. This is not information. This is just argument now. I'm making a motion to close public comment.
Okay, is there a second to the well, is there anyone else in the room that would like to comment, first of all?
There's no other in-person commenters.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and second. Please call the roll. Luke?
A motion to close public comment. Board Member Hill.
Close.
Board Member Rankin.
Aye, close it.
Board Member Harrod.
Aye.
Board Member Shalinsky.
No.
Board Member Swearingen.
Aye.
Board Member Palos. I think you might be muted. Could you repeat yourself?
Aye.
Thank you. Board Member Matthews,
No.
motion to close public comment carries 5-2.
Okay. So we have had staff presentation, applicant presentation, and public comment. It is now time for the board to discuss and make a motion. Any discussion?
I'll start the discussion. I have concerns based on the location of the property, and then moreover, though, my concern is with this this leased parking lot. It's not a solid lease. Anybody, it's a terminable lease. Month to month, as it were. And I just recall Lawrence Beer Company, which is just a block away, had a whole bunch of parking across the street. And about, I think a couple years after they opened, there's a residential building there. So Lawrence Beer Company, the patrons of Lawrence Beer Company and the other restaurant a block away could no longer use that as parking. Now obviously for them, there's a huge parking lot behind the restaurants. So it's not as impactful of an issue, but I think to say that, a leased parking lot is what's kind of hinges on whether or not there's enough parking is highly concerning, because we don't have crystal ball and we can't predict that future. And with the way that area is growing, I don't know. I just think that the prediction, we don't have a crystal ball. And I think that needs to be considered.
Thank you. Other comments? Well, I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit, because I think a lot of the discussion has kind of centered around the Warehouse Arts District, but this property is not in the district. It is adjacent to the district. I think the whole area, as time goes on, is going to have parking pressures, but this, while it's in the area, is not in the district. And so anything that's done in the district to address parking would not necessarily apply to this property. The other comment that I would make is that I'm reminded frequently that any variance that is granted for anything, in other words, virtually anything that comes before this board, may be based on a specific project. It may be based on specific promises. It may be based on specific conditions, but once granted, it is granted in perpetuity for this property for whatever future use might come to pass. And so that's always something that I keep in mind when making these decisions. Any other comments?
Chairperson Shalinsky, I would interject this for what it's worth. This property presents to me a little bit of a conundrum where we have a native stone building built maybe as long as 100 years ago or more. It's the kind of building that gives Lawrence its character, but at the same time, it's the kind of building we would like to preserve. But at the same time, this building is becoming dilapidated. It was dilapidated 2 years ago when we were talking about the non-conforming use, and it's dilapidated now. We have somebody that wants to go in and breathe new life into this property and keep it existing and keep it relevant. But what do we do with this property? So there's a tension there. Whenever we see an intensification of use, we need to look at it really closely, but there are some arguments to be made that this could be an appropriate use for this property. It's a tough one. I wish that more of the neighbors had turned out to talk with us this evening, but they're not here. So there's some questions that I would like to ask that are not going to be able to be answered by somebody that's living right next to this or just up the street or something like that.
Chair Shalinsky, I'll just jump in on this quick, quiet moment. You had mentioned the expiration or the perpetuity of a variance, and you're correct. And I'm sure you're aware, but I just wanted to be clear. Unless a building permit is submitted for, they do expire after 24 months. So if no action is taken, this variance would expire after 24 months. But everything else you said was correct.
Okay, thank you for agreeing with me and correcting me both. Other comments from board members?
What I see as the biggest difference between this one and the Turn Hall project is that already had parking right adjacent to it, that we already know there's been a parking study done on it. I mean, we had all the downtown area for the parking to make up for the spots that they couldn't provide. I'm with Tracy. I'm a little nervous about the lease. If they haven't done anything with that property that they're willing to let them park on, what does that mean in like 2 or 3 years when they have to put the landscaping or do all the things, if it's going to allow them to continue to park there? So that would be my one point I'd want to make. I just feel like it's a different project and there's different things to consider, even though we did approve that one. This one doesn't have that same option of just parking on Mass Street or parking at one of the many parking garages.
I just add to that. I'm not really great at counting parking spaces on the north side of 9th Street in particular, but I came up with 14. I was a little surprised at that. And when I thought about it, I mean, some of them were in front of that to be leased parking lot. Some of them were beside the building directly across the street to the north. Others were along where the tortilla factory is, and they have specific parking quite a bit for that building. So as I didn't get very far from the 900 Pennsylvania property, I was surprised at how many spaces were along the street. Anyway, just a comment on that.
I'm still confused about this parking across the street, the 39 spaces, of why they can't use it, because there's a lease that's in perpetuity. And wouldn't they be required then to come in and do a site plan on it? And isn't that a separate issue? I mean, cannot this project, let's say we approved it, they'd still have to go through the city, Luke, to get approval for the site plan for the parking lot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that's another step for them. Can I ask the applicant if they have an interest in that, or is that a fair question?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we would be looking at a site plan if we don't get a variance. But to be clear, we are going to use that parking whether or not we get a variance. That parking is going to be used for these patrons. It's just not counted for the city's code related parking requirements. And yes, it could be terminated upon 90 days notice. And that's the nature of this lease agreement. It is a pay to play though. It's $500 a month to rent this parking. There's no other parking available, no lots to buy. So this is the spot. But it is slated for future development.
All right. Thank you.
There's no use in site planning a property that's going to be developed in a few years, just to be clear. And the concern from site planning is that it's going to incur, potentially up to $20,000 of expenses to get it landscaped properly. Lighting, fences, the range of site plan improvements that the city would require. And I said 20,000, but that's probably a light statement. It's probably more than that.
Luke?
Yes.
Yes, just to be clear, you're saying then that even if they did have that parking space, as Patrick has said, the 39 spaces, the city would not consider that usable without a site plan?
Unless they were site planned as a code compliant off-street parking area with all of those elements that Pat just noted: landscaping, lighting, surfacing, dimensional standards. If it's just the kind of gravel, torn up cement or whatever it is right now, that would not be considered compliant off-street parking.
Okay. Thank you.
Other comments from board members? Is anyone prepared to make a motion if there's no further discussion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay. What's your motion?
I'm sorry, for a vote.
Okay, a proper motion for the board to vote on would either be a motion to approve the request, to deny the request, or to approve the request in part or with some conditions.
I think there might be a better way to state that. I think
Go for it.
think of it more black and white, Tracy. It's you can either vote to uphold the staff recommendation or you can vote to grant the variance. And our chairperson is right. Yeah, there's certain conditions that we could ask for, but it's kind of a narrow lane.
Okay. Then I vote to uphold the staff recommendations. I hold a vote.
Okay. So the motion is to uphold the staff recommendation, which is to deny the request or the application. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Excuse me?
I said, Board Member Rankin, I'll second that motion.
Okay, so there is a motion and a second. Staff, would you please call the roll? And just to clarify, a yes vote is to uphold the staff recommendation
Which
to deny
denies
the
the variance.
request. A no vote is against that motion. And if the noes prevailed, then we could consider a different motion. Okay, staff, please call the roll.
Okay, so a motion to uphold staff recommendation, which is to deny. Board Member Hill,
No.
Board Member Rankin,
Yes.
Board Member Harrod,
No.
Board Member Shalinski,
Yes.
Board Member Swearingen,
No.
Board Member Palos,
No.
Board Member Matthews.
Yes.
The motion fails 4-3.
Okay.
Mr. Chairperson, I'd make
would-
a motion if you would allow me.
Yes, please.
Mr. Chairperson, I would make a motion to grant the variance as requested, finding that the 5 conditions allowing it have been met.
I'll second that.
I think we just lost our chairperson again.
He looks like it. He was able to jump on last time, so let's give him a minute.
Can someone let me know what the motion was because I froze up?
Tracy, I made a motion to grant the variance as requested by the applicant, finding that the 5 conditions allowing the granting of the variance have been met.
You made a motion to grant the variance? Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. It's still I'm having the same problem as Barry is having, so I apologize.
Okay, I'm admitting him back in right now. Okay, so Board Member Harrod, if you might just repeat again one more time that last motion you had entered.
If you would permit, chairperson, would that be all right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. It looks like I'm going to have to just haul myself down to City Hall next time if I can't get my internet connection to work better.
Yeah, so staff has requested that I repeat my motion. So I have made a motion to grant the variance as requested by the applicant, finding that the 5 conditions allowing us to do so have been met. And I do not believe there's been a second.
Okay, I asked for a second, but maybe people did not hear that because I froze. So is there a second?
Yes, this is Dean Palos. I would like to second it. And I just would like to add that I'm struck by the fact that the city approved the rezoning with the understanding of what was implied by the application for this. And I think that's a strong indication to me that there is a desire for this development to go forward. So that's why I'm seconding this.
Okay, thank you. Will staff please call the roll?
Okay, a motion to approve the variance as requested by the applicant. Board Member Hill.
Yay.
Board Member Rankin.
No.
Board Member Harrod.
Aye.
Board Member Shalinski.
No.
Board Member Swearingen.
Sorry, I didn't find the button.
Board Member Palos.
Aye.
Board Member Matthews.
No.
The motion carries 4-3.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Patrick, for sitting through a long deliberation.
Thank you all for your time.
And we have an additional miscellaneous agenda item for the board, which is to approve a revised proposed meeting and submittal calendar for 2023. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at that attachment?
And Chair Shalinski, I will just note, you previously approved this back in November. We noticed once we started receiving February's submittals that there were some errors with the submittal deadlines. So we've revised those. The meeting dates are not changing. This is correcting a few submittal deadlines. We're honoring both calendars. There was 2 conflicting calendars, and we're honoring both deadlines for folks that want to come in on the February meeting. So at this point, we're looking at one item in February, and then approving this calendar is not changing any meeting dates. It's just correcting the submittal dates.
Okay, very good. Any questions, or if not, would anyone like to make a motion?
I would move to approve the calendar as proposed by staff.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Herod, seconded by Hill. Staff, would you please call the roll?
All right, a motion to approve the revised 2023 meeting calendar. Board Member Hill.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Harrod.
Aye.
Board Member Shalinski.
Yes.
Board Member Swearingen.
Yes.
Board Member Palos.
Aye.
Board Member Matthews.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other business to come before the board tonight?
Nope, not anymore on the agenda.
Hearing no additional business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Travis Herod. Do we have a second? Looks like Tressa Hill was raising her hand to do that. Okay.
All right.
We have a motion and a second. Staff, will you please call the roll?
Yes, a motion
to adjourn.
Yes, a motion to adjourn. Board Member Hill.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin,
Yes.
Board Member Harrod,
Aye.
Board Member Shalinski,
Yes.
Board Member Swearingen,
Yes.
Board Member Palos,
Aye.
and Board Member Matthews.
Thanks, everyone. We are
Thank you.
adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.